co-chairs for the St. Louis SQL Server and Business Intelligence User Group. I'm joined here by Murli Subramanian. You could correct me, Murli. And Gary Polinsky isn't currently on. Murli is going to start taking over Gary's role with the business intelligence portion of the user group. Today, we wanted to welcome Kathi Kellenberger. She's going to give us the what's new in SQL 2022. We do have an August meeting that's going to be a lunchtime meeting again. It's going to be August 8th, and we're still determining the lecture person for that. And these are the listings of some future data Saturdays and SQL Saturdays. You just go to the website and you'll get more information. They are one-day mini conferences. And then on November 15th, the Past Data Summit begins. So it is a hybrid conference again this year, both in person and online. And the sooner you register, the less expensive it is, but it's a great opportunity. And even with doing the online, you do have access to the recordings for a specific period of time. So it's a great learning opportunity, and it's in person. I mean, it's the premier SQL event. Redgate has taken it over, so it was all virtual last year, and it worked out really quite well. So I'm sure it's just going to be excellent. And here's the information all about today's meeting and about Kathi. She now is a customer success engineer at Redgate. So really congratulations on the new position, and we're looking forward to having many great presentations from you in the future. So I'm going to stop my sharing so that Kathi can take over. And Kathi, do you want to monitor the chat, or do you want us to let you know questions? Or
so what? Oh, there I am. So what I'd like to do is maybe have you save the questions, and I will ask you at certain points whether there's any questions or not.
That sounds great. So if you have questions, just put them in the chat.
And so I'm going to start. There I am. I'm going to go ahead and turn the camera off, I think, if you guys don't mind. But you can see that I'm really here. And I'm going to share. So hopefully you can see my slide, introductory slide. Okay. So hello, everyone. And I'm sure that you have heard that SQL Server 2022 hopefully will be out this year. I'm pretty confident about that just because they have given it this name, and I haven't heard anything otherwise. This deck and a lot of my demos are from Bob Ward, who graciously allowed me to use decks instead of trying to come up with my own, just because of I just felt like theirs were really good. You know, the marketing at Microsoft was really good, and you know, he said it was fine. So this is what I'm doing. You might see some other MVPs doing the same thing as well. So thanks to Bob. And I'm Kathi Kellenberger. As Julie mentioned, I'm a customer success engineer at Redgate. Off and on, I'm an instructor at LaunchCode. And since this is a St. Louis group, if you know anyone that has longed to work in IT but hasn't had the opportunity or the money for school or whatever, something's holding them back, please contact me, because LaunchCode has some wonderful programs that are getting folks into tech careers. And my brother is one. He did LaunchCode a few years ago, and he just told me about another promotion and raise that he got, and he's working at the Federal Reserve as a developer. Probably the most important thing to know about me is I'm a lifelong learner and teacher. And there's my email address at Redgate. in case you need to get in touch with me, especially if you know someone who could benefit from LaunchCode. So SQL Server 2022 has so much that I can't fit everything in one presentation. When I was getting ready for this, I kept coming up with more and more things to talk about and things that just wouldn't fit in an hour. So I'm going to show you some of the big things. Maybe if there's a few minutes at the end, I'll try to rattle off a few more things that are maybe smaller, but that do make an impact. So there's a little bit something for everybody. Microsoft is all in on Azure, as you can imagine. I was asked by Redgate a few months ago to re-up my certifications, get certifications up to date, and I noticed that there's no longer a SQL Server certification. It's Azure data, and everything is going towards the cloud. And what Microsoft has done in this case is even if you have a SQL Server in an on-premises data center, you can take advantage of some of the things in the cloud. And I'll talk about a couple of those. You may have seen me talk about intelligent query processing from time to time. I'm sure I've done that for this group probably last year. And once again, Microsoft has invested in this. So what does this mean? It's features that take care of some of the anti-patterns and weird things about how SQL Server works. So in other words, just by upgrading, you can often get faster queries without changing code. And it's one of my favorite things. There's some new things on security. I'll demonstrate one of those. Scalability and availability. There's quite a few improvements in availability groups. A lot have to do with performance, but there's also another really cool one you'll be excited about, and I'll talk about that. Data virtualization and object storage. I didn't really look into this too much, except that I understand that SQL Server will support S3 type storage instead of just Azure storage. So I think that's what that's all about. Didn't go into that real deep. Again, there's a lot here. And of course, my absolute favorite, new T-SQL features. So I'm always excited about the T-SQL. Not as much as I would hope this time, but still, quite a bit. All right, so here's a really, really exciting feature, and I promise that I tried so hard to get this working. So if you have a SQL managed instance, which are very expensive, they take a while to create, but I did create one over the weekend, and I tried to get this to work. So SQL Server 2022 will be able to link to the managed instance, and you'll be able to fail over. So it's basically an always on availability group that you just run with a quick little wizard. And I've seen Bob Ward demonstrate it. And at least from what I understand, at this point, at the release, it'll probably just fail over from on-premises or in a VM over to the managed instance. I don't think it will be failing back. I think that's something they'll do in the future. But you can take a backup of your database from Azure SQL Managed Instance and restore it on a regular SQL Server. So that is also something really, really new. So the problem I had everything set up. I followed all the documentation. There were a lot of steps to set this up. My SQL Server in my Azure VM could see the managed instance, but the managed instance couldn't see the SQL Server. And you had to get communication going both ways in order for this to work. So I might try this again at some point because it is such a cool feature. I just had a time limit on how much time I was going to spend. I don't have another slide on availability groups, but I do want to talk about a couple of things that didn't end up in these slides. So one of the I know Julie, or at least she uses availability groups, and probably a lot of you do. And one of the biggest headaches with availability groups is that what happens if you do fail over? If you fail over, you're going to be potentially missing users, you're going to be missing jobs, or maybe you've got a solution that you've worked on to, like, if you do fail over, turn the jobs off on the primary, turn them on the secondary, and well, now the secondary is a primary, but turn them on in this other server, and cross your fingers and hope that it all works. So starting with SQL Server 2022, we'll have this thing called contained availability groups. So what that means is that each availability group will have its own master and MSDB. So any security that you've got set up, or jobs or link servers, will move when you have your failover. So if you had jobs set up on server A, but you had a failover of your AG over to server B, your jobs will be there, your users will be there. So I'm very, very excited about this. There's some other, they're listed in the documentation, 5 or 6 other, things that will help improvement on the AG so they don't get behind. But one of the things that I was really excited about is that Microsoft continues to invest in recovery. And by recovery, I mean when a database is starting up. For example, you reboot a server or you have a failover. Sometimes there's a long time before that database is back online. So they've made additional investments in improving that and making that even faster. So that's another exciting feature. So Julie, are there any questions at this point? I may or may not be able to answer them. Okay, I am not.
No, I don't see any questions. But
Okay.
yes, I do use AGs, and yes, I have to make sure my logins are on both my servers. I have to make sure my jobs are on both my servers, and I code a special step that says, are you primary?
Right.
So it knows, should it run here or shouldn't it? It's a big pain.
Right, exactly. So luckily, you may not have to worry about in the future if you upgrade to SQL 2022 at some point. It is. I'm really happy about this. People have been asking for this forever. So Azure Synapse Link. I haven't done a lot in the analytics space and Synapse, but one of the new features is, again, another way that SQL Server on premises can link to something in Azure. So the idea here is that you'll have Azure Synapse, which then you can do machine learning, you can do Power BI, whatever analytics you want. But typically, you had to have some kind of an ETL process to get the data there. If it was on premises, or if it was even Azure SQL database, or wherever it was. So now you can set up this link and define what you want to go there, and it just automatically goes. So you get near real-time analytics of your operational data. So for those of you that are into Synapse, this can make your life simpler. And this one I've got a couple demos after, so I'll ask for questions after that. So Query Store, there are quite a few improvements with Query Store. I'm not going to do a Query Store demo, but one of the things that they're planning on doing, and I don't think it's going to be, they talked about it, but then I didn't see it happening in the CTP, which is all I can really go by, is that they're going to have Query Store automatically turned on for new databases. If you restore backup, you'd have to turn it on. But if you create a new one, I don't see that working yet. Another query store. This is another big availability group. People have been asking for this for a long time. If you're using Query Store and you're using availability groups, you could only have Query Store working on your primary. Let's say you were using a read-only replica for reporting. Obviously, you might want a different plan. You might want to use Query Store over there, but it wasn't available. So now, starting with SQL Server 2022, you get that Query Store support on read replicas, which another really great feature to help with performance. Another Query Store feature is the ability to assign hints. So I haven't really played with this. I've seen them do it. There's no way to do it in the GUI, but it's basically there's some commands that you can run. You have to figure out what the query ID is, and from looking at Query Store, and then just say, I want this hint. So previously, or typically, if you want to do a hint on a query, you've got to add that hint there. For example, max stop or something like that. But in this case, you can just add it to Query Store. Some other things that they've done with Query Store is kind of combine the functionality with some of the intelligent query processing features. For example, one of the features previously was called memory grant feedback, where if your memory grant was too high or too low, that it would adjust to be correct. The problem is if you restarted your SQL Server, that would go away. You'd lose that and it'd have to do it again. So starting with 2022, that information will be stored in Query Store. And I know there's a couple other situations where Query Store comes into play here. So one of the really great intelligent query processing features is called degree of parallelism feedback. So I'm sure that many of you have looked at weight stats and saw CX packet weights, and you saw that queries were just like blocking themselves, and it's like, okay, what do I do here? Well, then there's all this information about tuning max degree of parallelism or adding a query hint. So, but then what do you set it to? If you've got 8 cores or 16 cores, like what do you set that value to so that you get the best? How, or do you add a hint to every query? What in the world do you do to solve these problems? So starting with SQL Server 2022, there's this thing called degree of parallelism feedback. So if you have a query that's using parallelism, it will provide feedback back, to the optimizer and say, hey, why don't we try, nudging this down a bit? So it'll go down like 2 steps at a time and decide if that's okay. If it's not okay, it will go back. I do have a demo of this where I'll show you, that it was working and how it works. So that I think is a really great thing, because I know, from my years when I was consulting that, CX packet weights and queries like blocking themselves because of this were really a problem. And just knowing what in the world to set that feature to was also very difficult, because if you set it too low, then that can cause problems. There's also a feature called Cardinality estimation feedback. So since 2014, Microsoft has changed the way that the cardinality is estimated to come up with a plan. And sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad. So they keep working on that, and there's different models. I'm not deep in internals, so I just kind of go, okay, I believe you, and I don't really get into it too close. But anyway, what customers complained about was that often, the newer cardinality estimates were not as good as what they previously had. So again, there is this feedback loop that it starts with whatever the latest and greatest is, but if it sees that the performance is degrading, it'll try a different one and then stick at the one that makes sense for that particular query and workload. So I didn't play with this one, but I think that is also a really great idea. I have not really run into issues with that one. And finally, and I also have a demo for this one, parameter sensitive plan optimization, PSP. It's got a really long name, but I am very, very happy about this. And I do have a little slide to show you what we're talking about here. So let's say I have a stored procedure called myproc, and I'm sending in a parameter of 1. And for this particular parameter, a seek, possibly with a key lookup, is the best plan. But I also have occasionally send in with other parameters and with a lot more rows. And maybe the best plan for this particular parameter 10 is actually a scan, because I'm sending through thousands of rows instead of just a handful. Well, before this feature, and I know there's a million workarounds that are, none of them are pretty. Your whatever plan got stuck in cache, or whatever query ran first, and while that plan was in cache, both calls would use the same plan. So what would happen is if the 10 ended up getting the plan for the 10 parameter got stored in cache, then which is a scan, then when we ran it with 1, it would also do a scan. And now all of a sudden a query that should run in milliseconds was taking, maybe 10 seconds. So starting with 2022 and PSP, we can have the same situation. One query would like one plan, one parameter would like another plan. But instead of storing just one plan in the cache, it can store multiple plans per query. And I will show you an example of that. A few gotchas before I get to that is that I played with the CTP, and I actually had early access to some of the CTPs. I could not get this to work consistently. And then just recently, I found out that the reason I couldn't get it to work consistently is that I took some data and then I modified a large number of rows to get the skewness, to get a skew, and I didn't update the index when I did that. So even though the statistics look right, it didn't work consistently until I updated the index. So that is a gotcha on here. So let's take a look at these two. And I'm running, oh, it popped into the wrong window. Here we go. I think, there we go. Hopefully you can see that. And I'm going to start with DOP feedback. All I'm really going to show you here is the extended event that you can run with it. The reason being that the demo that I used, each time I ran the query, it took about 6 minutes. So I'm not going to go through all that. There are, but you can get some information. So the first couple times that the query ran, and actually you don't really care so much about what's down there. It's the same query. And put that up here as well, so you can see it. The first time the query ran with 8 procs, and that's what I've got on this VM, 8 cores. Okay, I ran it with the same parameter each time, and I ran it again at one point, and it went ahead and said, let's try 6 and see if 6 is better. So I ran it, so it decided that it was fine. It ran it a couple of times, making sure that it was really better than 8, and finally it decided it was stable. I ran it a few more times, it never changed again, and it didn't show up in the extended event either. So in the instructions from Bob, he said it would go down to 2 and stay there. And I even have made sure my VM was matched as far as processors and memory, you know, what he had given in his instructions, but it still only went down to 6. So I was running this last night, and I even, let's see, 03. I wasn't up at 3 in the morning. It's just that this is, the time zone's different on this VM. So I'm pretty excited about this. Really, really excited about this, because this is just something that we know needs tuned, but we're often not sure how to tune it. And I'm going to show you the PSP demo, and then after that, I'll see if there's any questions. So both of these are dependent upon the version or the compatibility level. So if you just bring a database over from another server and don't modify the, you know, from an older version and don't modify the compatibility level, you will not get the effects. And if you see any of my intelligent query processing sessions, I talk about that extensively. So here I've got a copy of sales order detail, and I went ahead and modified the data a bit to get a skew. So I've got so I picked these 3 numbers. I have a small number of orders. I've got a medium-sized number of orders and a large number of orders. So that's the data I'm going to be playing with here. This is the stored procedure that I created. It takes the product ID and it just returns all the columns from that particular, and I know that's a bad practice, but this is a demo. All the columns from this little table I created, filtered by the product ID and ordered by the order quantity. And I'm ordering it, that's real important for this. So what I'm going to do first is set the compatibility level down to 2019. I'm going to clear the procedure cache to make sure there's nothing in there to affect this. And I am going to run this first one. And this is the one with a small number of rows. 13 rows, it came back immediately. If I take a look at the execution plan, I can see that it's a really small pipe running through. There's an index seek with a key lookup, and that's fine because it's just a small number of rows. That's the best plan for this query for that particular parameter. But what in the world's going to happen when I run it against 700,000 rows? I don't really want to be doing a key lookup. But unfortunately, it's still running. No. Oh, this is the medium. That's the medium. Okay. Not the 700,000. That's 13,000 rows. But again, I have got, I got the key lookup with the nested loop. I've even got a problem where I've spilled to tempdb because it didn't know how much memory I needed. I skipped one. I skipped the biggest one. Here's the biggest one. And let's see how long this, hopefully it doesn't take too long to run. It's already starting to return some results, but it is still running. And it took 8 seconds. Probably most of that was populating the grid, I bet. It's better sometimes to not populate the grid when you're doing timings. So again, I've got this plan that's perfect for a small number of rows, but not so great for a large number of rows. So I'm going to set the compatibility level to 2022. I'm going to go ahead and clear the procedure cache and also clear query store. I did hear Microsoft say you don't need query store for this particular feature. However, it does retain the data if you want to look at it. So that's why we're going to use that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and run these again. And again, 13 rows. And I got the nice plan that I expect. And 870. So previously I had the key lookup, which is a bad thing with that many rows. I don't know that this is going to run any quicker just because it takes so long to populate. It's 5 seconds. I'm not sure what it took before. But when I look at the execution plan, I see something very different. I see the plan that's really the best for this particular number of rows coming back. 770. I need a clustered index scan. I don't want to be doing that key lookup. That's really a bad idea. And here's my medium number of rows. Let's see what happens. And again, I have got, and I don't have any sort warnings. Everything is looking really good. So I'm really happy about that. I'm going to run this one a couple more times. So that one's 4. And the reason I'm doing that is so that we can see it, which is which in the next query. So this is using Query Store to look at these plans to see what's going on. So each plan is called a variant. It is exactly the same query. They all have the same parent query ID, but they each have a different query variant. And you can kind of see this was the really fast one. This one was the big number, and this was the medium. They each have a different plan ID. And they have this is another term that you'll hear, dispatcher plan. The dispatcher plan is the piece that decides which one of these plans should be used. And I want to show you, I'm going to take a look at the XML on what to look for here. I might have to do a search. Okay, query variant. No. Is that it? It's much bigger than when I was practicing because I wanted to make sure you could see everything. I'm having trouble with it. I feel like it's locked up. Okay, this is what I want. We can see the query variant ID. We can see the memory grant info. Okay, so those are important. And the reason that I wanted to show an intermediate as well as the large one is because they actually need a different memory grant. So the really large number of rows back should have a, come on, it's like nothing's working for me all of a sudden. There we go. Should have a, I wonder if I can just find it this time. Maybe if I do a search for memory grant. There we go. So the memory grant should be different compared to the smaller one. And let's see, where does it say? Somewhere it also has the query variant number. So that's really all I wanted to show you on those, that even though plan 2 and plan or plan 3 and plan 4 were different plans. The difference was the amount of memory granted. So any questions about what I've covered so far, Julie?
I don't see any questions in the chat.
Okay.
People have questions, just please type them in the chat and we'll get to them at the different breaks.
Okay. I'm going to go back over to the slides and go on to the next one. Okay, so security. There are some features to do with security. There's a couple of other ones besides this thing called SQL Server Ledger. One of them is has to do with using some of the features in Azure that you could use on your Azure SQL database that will be able to be used on premises. And the other is they've extended some of the functionality with the always encrypted. So I'm not going to really talk about those. Just want to let you know that they were available. So this is the really interesting one, I think. So when I hear things like blockchain, my mind just goes blank. You know, I feel like, oh, I think I need to be 20 or 30 years younger to think about this stuff. So the idea here is that even though you have things in SQL Server like temporal tables or auditing, a DBA theoretically could work around some of these things if they were a rogue DBA. Let's hope we don't have any of those. So what Microsoft did is took advantage of this technology called blockchain to create some special kinds of tables called ledger tables that either can't be tampered with, or if they are tampered with, it's obvious. And you cannot turn this off. It's not like you can turn off auditing and do something and turn it back on. You cannot turn this off, and you can delete the entire database. Obviously, you'd probably get caught doing that, but you can't get rid of the record. Okay, and it has to do with hashing the rows and you know, I'm not going to go into all the blockchain stuff because my brain will just kind of like go to sleep because I just don't get it. But I will show you a demo of it working. Can do that for you. All right, Ledger. So I have already done some of this. I've created the tables required for the demo. So the first one is an employees table, and we want this to be an updatable ledger table. So what does that mean? I'm allowed to delete rows. I'm allowed to change rows. So our application adds rows, but it might change a row as well. The things you got to look for here is system versioning. So we want a history table of those changes, and also ledger equals on. Okay, so that's how we get that functionality. So I'm not going to run it because I've already got it populated. The other type of ledger table you can create is append only. So here's one. So let's say we have an application where we change things about our employees, and we want to keep track of who does what. So in that application, in a transaction, it'll write to the employees table, but it also will write to the audit events table at the same time to keep track of what was done. So in this case, again, ledger equals on, but it's also an append only table. We cannot get rid of any rows. We cannot go in here and change anything. So if somebody was trying to change something in the employee table, let's say they bypassed the app and went straight to Management Studio and then put their own audit event row in and put someone else's username or something like that, or just didn't, they cannot go and change that or fix it, quote unquote. Okay, so whenever you create a ledger table, you get a couple of interesting things. Well, if you create one that, let's see, that's Contoso HR. When you create one that is updatable and you want the history, you've got this history table. You get that automatically. I also like, hopefully you can see it. I thought that, oh, there's Zoom. I'm like, why is Zoom not working? And it zoomed in, it was too big. I guess I won't use that. It just zoomed like crazy. I like how it's, got the definition here of what it actually does. The other thing, so my employee table just had a small number of columns, but if I expand this, I can also see there's a bunch of ledger type columns as well. If I go over and look at views, I also see that there's a special view for each one of these tables as well. And that's if you want to see everything, if you want to see the current data and also the history, you can do that. So my tables are already populated. But let's go ahead and look at this. If I just do a select star from employees, I get the columns that I expected to see, the columns that I added to the table originally in the create statement. If I list out all these extra columns and SQL doesn't even think those belong, I can see these additional columns here. But what you really are supposed to do is use this ledger table. It's not a ledger, it's a view. Use the ledger, employee ledger view. And when I look at this, I can see, what's happened, the ledger sequence number. And if I look at the employees, I can see something odd here. J. Adams was originally just $54,000 a year, but all of a sudden he got a $50,000 raise. So this row ended up being deleted and another row was inserted. And I think there's a couple other ones that their salaries were also changed as well. So who did that? Was that supposed to happen? So I can use this sys database ledger transactions. I can join my employee ledger table to that to see who actually did it. And so some of these were entered by Bob. He's the person that was supposed to be working on it, but some of them were entered by the DBA, my admin. So, oh, great. We were not supposed to let anyone be able to see that. If I look at that, if I look at this history table that gets automatically created, I can see the old rows of what they were before it was changed. So you know what? I really don't want anyone to know that I made that change on Mary Alexander. So I'm going to try to delete that out of that ledger history. I really don't want that there, but it cannot be deleted. So on my, so let's say I want to make, I don't know, let's do somebody else, make a change to someone's employee history. And I'm going to go through here again, instead of through the through the app, and I'm going to say Bob made the change. I'm going to try to cover my tracks. And if I go here to audit events, that's what it says. It said that Bob made the change. But again, if I run that against that ledger transaction table, it says who really did it, so I can't cover my tracks. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I can just change this. Let's see. This is principal name, audit events. Yeah, so that's the audit events table. Maybe I can change that one. And I cannot do it, so I can't make any changes. I cannot turn it off. Let's say I want to turn it off and make some changes. I cannot do that. I can't make any changes to the history table. I can't drop the history table. I haven't tried this next part yet. Let's see what happens. It says I can drop the employee table. So it did let me drop that. But if I look at this, you can see that somebody dropped that table. And theoretically, that will, then you can go back to the transactions and find out who did it. And you cannot drop, let's see, to grab that piece, place the code, and cannot drop it. So that table, that history sticks around. So any questions so far with what I've covered, Julie?
No, I'm not seeing any questions. If people can type into the chat, or if you're unable to type in the chat, you could raise your hand and I'll unmute you. At the next break, but everything looks good.
Okay. The last section is language enhancements for developers, and this is my well, I love the intelligent query processing, but I also love T-SQL. That's just my thing. What kind of enhancements have been added? I would have loved to have seen more. There's always more we can add. So there's really 3 areas. There's some new functionality for JSON data, if you happen to work with that in SQL Server. There are a few new T-SQL functions and some enhancements to a couple of functions. And previously in Azure SQL Edge, which is something that you do for like IoT or some kind of streaming data, there was this thing called time series data. So they went ahead and added that to SQL as well. So let's take a look at those. Okay, first of all, JSON. I don't really work with JSON too much, but there are, it looks like 3 new functions. One of them is called path exists. So basically, if I pass in some valid JSON and I have a particular path I want to check to see if it's there. So, and I took this from the document, Microsoft's docs, because I just don't know enough about JSON. But anyway, here's some valid JSON. You can follow the path from info to address. Here's the same JSON, but in this case, I've misspelled and put addresses instead of address. So I'm going to go ahead and run those. And in this case, the first one, yes, that path exists, or that path doesn't exist. So that might be something like you want to make sure that not only is the JSON valid, but it is actually the JSON that you expect before you start querying it. Another one, I'm going to run both of these, two examples. One of them is we're going to create a JSON object from this key value pair data. And in the next one, I'm going to do the same thing. However, I'm pulling in columns instead of just hard-coded values. So the first one just returns some valid JSON key value pair, and the second one is pulling from sysconnections, I think, exec sessions. So just pulling in data from there, just to show you that you can do it in a table. And the last JSON one is called Json Array. So we're sending in a comma delimited list, or in this case, a comma delimited list of columns, and I get back an array, which evidently is square brackets with commas, and there's the same idea. Well, that's the JSON enhancements. And what else? T-SQL enhancements. All right, so the first one is date bucket. This came from SQL Edge. I had to go out to Itzik's article to figure out what in the world this thing was about. I didn't quite get it. The idea is that you might want to, you have a date and you want to find out which bucket it lands in. So you get the start date from a particular bucket. And it takes three parts. You need to know what, are you working with months? Are you working with years? Are you working with minutes? How wide do you want it to be? Do you want it to be 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? The date that's inside the bucket you're interested in, and the origin date. So if you don't start with an origin, a particular origin date, it does like January 1, 1900, something like that. So I'm going to start with just looking at the minimum date and the maximum date and the calendar year and the number of orders and total value. So if we're looking at the calendar year, and I'm really thankful that it's provided this example because this is the only thing that really made sense to me. We have some value, some in the calendar year of 2011, we have stuff from May to December, and then 2014, we have stuff January to June. What if their fiscal year started with July 15th? What if that was the case? So what we're going to do then is, instead of just using the year and grouping by the year, we are going to use this date bucket function to figure out which fiscal year a particular date is in. So we want the date type to be year, 1 year. This is our order date. This is the date we're concerned with. And the origin, he put 1900 July 15th, because July 15th is the start of the fiscal year. So he used a cross apply to call the function and grouped by the function. Where before I was grouping by the year, now we're going to be grouping by the start of bucket. So the start of the bucket will be the first day of the new fiscal year. So if I look at this, previously I did not have any 2010, but now since the fiscal year starts July 15th, everything in 2011 before July 15th is going to land in that earlier bucket. And previously I had a 2014 bucket. I don't have that anymore because the dates didn't go, I think they went to June something. So this, thanks to Itzik for this, because it just was really hard to understand what this feature was for. Probably somebody that works with analytics might make more sense to. I did get the fiscal year. Another new function is called generate series. Generate series, it's kind of odd how you have to call it. I tried calling it with just numbers, and I know I had to say start equals, stop equals, step equal. So this is another way to create a series of numbers, 1 to 1,000,000, or like a number table. You can, for your step, you can specify a decimal if you wish. I did find that if I specified a decimal here, I also had to have these be the same data type. I couldn't put integers here. I also might want to create a list of dates as well. So all I did is start with from generate series, grab the value there, and just added the number to that date to get a list of dates. Another one is called greatest and least. I don't see a ton of value with this one. This is something that could be done with a case. And whenever I usually see something like this, I always like, it's just, kind of a convenience. So we have this employee data. They have vacation hours and they have sick leave hours. I guess that's remaining. What if we want to find out like which they have the most of for each employee? So the most hours in this case is 99, the least hours is 69, the most is 20, the least is 1, and so on. So that's how that works. Again, it could easily be done with a case statement. String split has been around for a while. I like it. I've seen people complain about it because if you have a really, really long list, there's other things that perform better, but typically you're not going to have a gigantic list. So I like it. I think it's much better than trying to use the XML functions or write your own function. So what people have been asking for is an ordinal. So that's the piece that's new here. So instead of just getting the values back, I can also have an ordinal or like an index. Of course, it is one-based, so I guess it's not really an index, but that's the enhancement there. So let's talk about windowing functions. That's my specialty.
Hey,
And
Kathy.
yeah, got a question?
Yeah, Clayton asked if the greatest and least functions work like coalesce in that they support a variable number of inputs.
Yes, that is correct. Let's see. I could put, I had another, let's add another one. Hello, Clayton. I didn't know he was on the call. So here I've added business entity ID to it as well. So yeah, you can have, I don't know if it's unlimited, but it's not just comparing to. Of course, so you're right. If you had 4 or 5 things you wanted to compare, it'd be a lot simpler to do this than a nested case, obviously. That would get really messy. It's a great question. Any other questions?
No, that was it.
Okay. So this is an update to first value and last value, which is, these are a couple of the, I'm not going to run all that, but this is a couple of the windowing functions that gives you in your particular partition or window that you're working with, what is the first value? What is the value in the first row? May or may not be sorted that way. So it's not the same as min. So I just have some of the columns from the product table from AdventureWorks, and I set some of them to null. So if I run this to find first value, I'm going to run it first and see that it's a pain to look at because I've got this subcategory repeated over and over. I'm going to just go ahead and add distinct to make it easier to look at. for what I'm working with, you know, that's fine. Oh, that's weird that it ended up, what did I do to get it to go there? Interesting. Oh, I hit Control T instead of Control R. Okay, so if I look at this, I see number 14, the first value is null. Even though there might be other values that are not null. So what if we don't want to do that? So they added to first value and last value this thing called ignore nulls. It does not really work the way that I would expect. So I need to really spend some more time looking at this. And so what I end up with, it doesn't look to me like it's ignoring null, but what it's doing is returning null for the window where it's null, and then it's returning another, you know, another 14 with the lowest non-null number. So I need to do some more research to figure out, like, why is it doing that? Why would we want that? Because I would just think we just wouldn't want this one. So the other syntax is respect nulls, and that works just that's the default. So if you don't include it, it's respect nulls. And I have one more thing, and then I'm done. A reusable Windows clause. So let's say we have a query like this where we've got several window functions, and we're repeating, like in this case, I'm repeating partition by customer order, you know, I'm repeating this. So this particular feature, again, it's more convenience, but I think it's pretty cool. So what I can do is add this new window clause here to replace my over, or what my over is looking at. So here, if I say partition by customer ID, I can just use this alias here and pop it in right there. And I get the same results. So you can do even more with this. Well, that's cool, but I also have this partition by up here. So what I can do is define more windows. I've only got them going forward. Supposedly you can go backwards and forwards. I haven't tried that yet. So what I'm doing with the second one is I'm saying start with cust win and then add order by sales order ID. So up here in my query, instead of repeating all of those, each one of these is using an alias. So that might come in handy if you're using, you know, a whole bunch of these. So Julie, are there any more questions?
I don't see any questions. If anybody has a question, you can type it in the chat, or if you raise your hand, I'll unmute you.
I think that aliasing is very helpful so that you don't have to repeat it like 5 times, especially.
Exactly. Yep, exactly. Yeah, it'll definitely save typing. What I'll do is I'll send these resources to Julie, since these are Bob's slides, and you will see him using, you know, a bigger set of slides and different demos that he has. I'll go ahead and send these resources to Julie that she can pass along, and I might find some more. I might look tomorrow and find some more resources. So that's really all I've got, and thank you so much for letting me talk about SQL Server 2022 today with all of you.
I do see somebody raising their hand.
Okay.
Whoops, hold on.
I don't know if they're trying to type, but please feel free
They can
to
type, or if they want to
type a
just
question
if you can unmute them, maybe.
Yeah, sure.
They'd like to talk.
Okay, I've unmuted. You should be able to unmute yourself now. Just go and unmute over on your pane. Oh,
I do have a question in the meantime. I mean, this is more generic too, in the
Mhm.
time that the other person is trying to unmute themselves. So I guess generate series, it's pretty, I mean, it's more like a confirmation. You cannot really use date or date time. It has to be integers.
Say it again, which thing?
You
Generate
cannot
series?
directly have a start and stop as a date or date time. It has to be integers.
Generate series has to be in what?
It has to be integers. It cannot be date or date time values.
The generate series, the only thing I saw, and if you look at, I think I'm still sharing, is
Yes.
you can generate a number and then apply the date add. I
Okay.
did not see where you could just directly create dates. You had to apply, I had to apply that date add.
Okay.
So unless I could be missing something, but when I looked at it, it wanted integers.
Okay, got it.
Here, and it didn't want integers, it wanted numbers, some kind of number.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. But yeah, that would make sense that they would have also a generate date series.
Yeah, it would be a lot easier.
Yeah.
I see Dan asked about if you covered contained AGs.
I didn't do a demo.
Beginning.
Yeah, I didn't, let me find that slide. I didn't have time to really set up I guess the easy way would be for me to look for the slide.
Sorry, just so you know, he did mention that he joined late, so.
Okay.
I'm not going.
Okay, so let me figure out how to get to this slide. Here we go. I mentioned, and why is my clicking not working? There we go. Yeah, at the beginning, I didn't have a slide for it, and I didn't see a slide, but I talked about the contained AGs, about being able to pull over jobs and users and permissions and link servers. There's a lot to talk about. I just thought of, another thing I didn't mention. There's a bunch of new server roles. There's a lot in this release.
Yeah, since I mean, I know initially you mentioned about movement towards Azure and also the fact that there are no more SQL Server certifications. I feel like that's a question for the entire community as well as you, Kathi. You feel like there's a lot more switch over to Azure, because even in our company, that has been the focus to move everything to cloud versus being on-prem.
Yeah, that's the way it's going. Definitely the way it's going. But there's still, a need for, standalone SQL servers, but you can put those in the cloud because you can put them in virtual machines. So but yeah, definitely that's how it's going. So when I did take the test, I did there were questions about SQL Server, but it's like back in the day, there was a separate test on queries. There was a separate test on database administration. You know what I mean? And now it's like one test, but you've got to know about Azure SQL Database, and you've got to know a little bit about Cosmos DB, and you've got to know about, how the storage works and how the availability works, and you know what I mean? It's more Azure focused.
Yeah, I feel like the split the admin work is a little less with the service, with the cloud movement and cloud infrastructure. A lot of
Yeah.
people seem to use, just developers take on the networking aspect of it, using VMs or IRs. knowing what they mean, how they can impact us as a developer. And also, I don't know how. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say things. I mean, I haven't really been a developer for like 20 years, but things are so different because you have all these little serverless things. You know, it's like just little tiny services that you can kind of hook together to make applications. Very different.
Exactly. A lot of people do use Azure functions, and that being available in Microsoft itself, like Microsoft, I couldn't believe they have like over 100 or some 100 and odd services just within within the cloud realm. So
Yeah.
plus, I mean, the fact that JSON movement towards having JSON. And I don't know how many people use are more using SQL anymore, because developers seem to see a lot of migration towards coding using other languages like Python being the main one, or JavaScript. And I feel like even within developers, the usage of SQL has really gone down. I don't know if that has been the experience with this community, and if you guys are still moving towards Azure too.
I don't have an answer. So I don't know if anyone else does. There's definitely a lot of options.
Yeah, how about I mean, even within Redgate and stuff, I don't know if you guys are seeing
So
more
what we're doing, so we've typically been seen as a SQL Server company, even though we did have a product line for Oracle. And what we're doing now is we bought a tool called Flyway about 3 years ago, which is a not really database agnostic, but it's like it works with like 20 different databases for deploying SQL code. And we're building around that. And so like some of our tools, specifically, like we have a product right now called Redgate Deploy, where you can use that for your DevOps, for your deployment scripts if you're doing DevOps. And you can either use it for SQL Server or you can use it for Oracle. You just have to say what you're doing at the beginning. But we're also right now working on adding Postgres and MySQL to that. And, at some point, hopefully you'll be able to just have, the same functionality regardless of which database you're working in. Now, these are relational type databases. They're not like key value pairs or, JSON type document databases or anything like that. But yeah, we're definitely branching out from SQL Server. Even though SQL Server is my favorite.
Well,
Is
that
there
looks like
anything?
everything from the chat and stuff. If anybody wants to be unmuted, just raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Oops. I've tried to unmute the person who called in. I've tried multiple times. I mean, it just looks to me like you should be able to unmute yourself. I've said allow mic. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak or have a question? That's Dan on Teams. Dan, I unmuted you in your other window. where it says meeting guest, Dan. I've unmuted you there. So I don't know if that would be with the computer. But you should be able to unmute yourself. But well, I wanted to just reach out again and say thank you very much to Kathi for presenting such a timely topic. Hopefully we will get SQL 2022 in this year. And there's a lot of really, I'm excited about the contained AGs. That might simplify my world. And it's interesting, the one Synapse to Azure. Yeah.
The Synapse link.
Yeah, that looked very fascinating. Now, if we can only get the data up to Azure or to Synapse in a timely fashion.
That's what this will do. Theoretically, they said within a minute or so, it should be in sync with what am I trying to say? It should be replicated to these things called SQL pools. I'm looking for the slide. Oops, I guess I got it. I can't just pop to a slide.
But the issue is that I have is getting the data from the on-prem into the data lake. So the bottom line is where I'm having problems.
Okay. Yeah, theoretically, if you set this up, it just automatically goes to these things called SQL pools. I don't know if the pools it's next to the lake, in the lake, I don't know. But you know, and I've seen a demo of it. Let me write this down. I'll see if I can find a demo of it to send you, because I know there's some recordings out there.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, it'll be very helpful because we have had a difficulty trying to load data from on-prem to our data lake storage.
Yeah, this is supposed to be pretty quick to get it there.
Well, this is great.
At least,
well,
or at least next to it. Next to it.
Well, thank you so much for your time today or tonight. And our next meeting is going to be in August, and we'll get that set up as soon as possible. And go out to the PASS website and investigate, if you're going to be able to join the PASS conference in person or even virtual. You do get access to the recordings. Some of the lectures are live and some are recorded. And I thought it was very good last year. It was very helpful. And you still had virtually, they still had some like meeting rooms that you could go to and chat. So
yeah, I didn't make it to that summit because I had already planned a vacation. I'm going to say holiday because I'm used to talking to people in here in England. They always say holiday. They don't say vacation. But I should be there in person this year. So.
That's exciting. Yeah, I'm going to attend virtually. It's all on my dime this year again. So, so I'm going to attend virtually. But yeah, so hopefully we'll see everybody next month. And thanks again, Kathi. Next month is an afternoon meeting. And really appreciate the time and the topic.
All right. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.
I really appreciate it all.
Thank you. Bye.